Well, it's tribal. I think it's just that, you know, two groups of geezers from different towns want to fight each other. It's just inbred in the blood of young Englishmen.
Hooligans have become the scourge of British football. The authorities in the south have shown this week they're determined to tackle the problem head-on. But is it a match they can ever hope to win? Portsmouth on the day of the big match. Pompey are at home to Everton. 300 police have been drafted in from around Hampshire. It's a big operation, but the authorities are convinced it's justified. They've declared war on football hooligans all over the south. Only 2 days ago, 6 Brighton supporters convicted of public order offences were banned from their club for life. In Portsmouth, it's been a big problem. For years here, it's what's happened off the pitch that's made the headlines. While the club fought its way out of obscurity, a small but vicious minority continued to blacken Pompey's name. Pompey's promotion to Division 1 last season gave the police a new problem. Suddenly the league's big names like Chelsea, West Ham and champions Everton were coming here to Fratton Park, and with them a hardcore of followers with a reputation for trouble. Pompey's chairman, John Deacon, insists that violence here is under control, and he believes the club's own hardcore thugs are no longer a threat. But is the problem really licked? And if organised violence on match days can be suppressed, will the hooligans simply strike in another place at another time? On television news, scenes like these at big football matches have become all too frequent. But no one was prepared for what happened at Heysel 2 years ago. 39 people died, trampled underfoot in the panic. The authorities promised tough action to stamp out what had become known around the world as the British disease. A government inquiry headed by Mr. Justice Popplewell responded with a string of proposals for crowd safety and control. At Fratton Park, many of these measures were already in force. Because of the long history of crowd trouble in Portsmouth, the club and the police began a crackdown in the early 1980s. They installed closed-circuit television on the ground. Besides helping officers pick out the troublemakers, it worked as a deterrent. Rival fans were kept apart and well fenced in. Family sections were introduced to reassure parents still worried by Pompey's reputation. And the club warned that convicted troublemakers would be banned for life. The new regime seemed to spell the end for violence on the terraces. But despite this success, or maybe because of it, another sort of violence emerged that was altogether more sinister. The war on the terraces was to spill out onto the streets. In Portsmouth, the group behind much of the violence called itself the 657 Crew. Hooligan gangs like these seem to have been their inspiration. This was West Ham's notorious intercity firm taking on the Red Army of Manchester United. Police raids on other gangs produced a frightening array of weapons, all evidence that the hooligans had to be taken seriously from wherever they came. Apart from the intercity firm and Red Army, there were the Service Crew in Leeds, the Blades at Sheffield United, the Zulu Warriors from Birmingham, the Chelsea Headhunters, the Millwall Bushwhackers, the Inside Firm of Southampton, and of course the 657. Psychologist Roger Ingham has closely followed the rise of so-called crews as part of a long-term study on football hooliganism. He believes they've added a dangerous new dimension to crowd control on match day.
I think as far as events that happen in the ground itself during games, there's no doubt they've been very successful. The problem is, of course, that a lot now has been driven outside the grounds, and a lot of the people that used to be involved in trouble in the grounds are now being very creative in planning ways of still having trouble, either en route to the ground or even on days where there isn't a game.
In Portsmouth, the 657 crew took its name from the Saturday morning train to Waterloo. Right from the start, they were to demonstrate they were no ordinary football supporters. The matches mattered little. The real excitement was in taking on rival gangs around the stadium, as the 657 admit.
We've had fights at Waterloo Station regularly with Millwall supporters over the last 5 years. I mean, one Millwall supporter ended up with a fractured skull there. People have been slashed with standing ice. I've seen people have bricks thrown in the head, things like that.
Trouble on the Portsmouth streets on match day has become a regular event. The police's biggest problem since the advent of the 657 has often been to identify the troublemakers, because they seldom fit the popular image of the football hooligan.
You can say that they probably fall within the age group of 16 to 40. Most of them are employed probably, holding down quite good jobs, earning quite good money. The sort of person that you would pass in the street and not think anything of it, and yet on football match days they change into something entirely different. You could say perhaps the bank manager type is also included in the football hooligan list. They're from all walks of life, there's no doubt about it.
The veneer of respectability masking the violence of the 657 was at its best in the June general election, when Martin Docker Hughes was nominated as the 657 candidate for Parliament. In the event, he mustered only 250 votes. To outsiders, it may have seemed a joke, but for the gang themselves, it was a good way to cock a snook at the establishment and show their strength.
I'd just like to say thank you very much to all our supporters who's turned out to vote for us tonight and in the future.
Raising the £500 deposit, organising leaflets and posters, as well as staying within the complex electoral law, showed a level of organisation with disturbing implications, even if the tone of the campaign was tongue-in-cheek. After their excursion into politics, the 657 went back full-time to football. Pompey had just won promotion to the First Division. The police knew that meant bigger crowds and potentially bigger trouble.
When we looked at the fixture list that came out for this season, it was Chelsea, Southampton and West Ham in the space of about 12 days, each with its own particular problem. Southampton because it was a local derby, Chelsea and West Ham because they do have particular problems with their hooligan element, and as such presented a challenge to our hooligan element as well.
The police fears proved well-founded. When Southampton visited Portsmouth on August the 22nd, trouble broke out on the streets. Among the innocent victims, this 21-year-old Pompey fan attacked with a Stanley knife on his way to Fratton Park. In this first interview, he asked not to be named for fear of reprisals.
First of all, I was being punched repeatedly by about 5 or 6 people, and then I got taken to an ambulance by my friend's wife. And they told me I was slashed inside the ambulance. 100 stitches I had to have all in all, 60 on the outside and 40 in.
So they'll be parking all over the place, no doubt.
The events of that day were a grim reminder to the Hampshire police that football matches these days have to be treated almost as military operations. 2 weeks ago, we joined them for Pompey's most recent home game against league champions Everton.
And we'll go on to
the day started with a series of briefings on the special problems that hosting the northern team would present.
Their colours are blue and white, which aids in the confusion, so we won't really know whether we're looking at our own fans or away fans unless we can identify them by higher firm numbers, names, etc. on the side.
In fact, the police operation began weeks earlier. They'd even produced a video showing all the likely trouble spots and how to keep the rival fans apart.
The railway station is south in Apsley Road and west along Goldsmith Avenue.
The task is made easier by precise information on the visiting supporters. As with every big match, it's an all-ticket affair, so the police know how many fans will travel south.
They've sold 1,000 tickets, 800 for the East Terraces and 200 for D section. And anybody who can do simple maths means that we can account for 400 by coach. There are no passengers that we know of by train. Nothing has left Liverpool since 8:30 this morning, headed for Portsmouth. So we've got something like 600 people coming by diverse means of transport.
It's the private cars and vans that give the police their biggest worry. Today's hooligans don't travel by official coach or train, precisely to avoid detection. Well before the match starts, the police move into position. But if they're well prepared, so too are the hooligans, and to a frightening degree. Portsmouth's Somers Town estate, where members of the 657 rub shoulders with ordinary Pompey supporters. All week, today's game has been the main topic throughout the pubs and clubs. The big question for most of them, who's in the team and whether they'll reverse Pompey's string of poor results. But for others, it's a different sort of action that's important.
You could talk about 5 or 6 different fights on a Saturday with 5 different teams. You'd be going up north and someone would be waiting for you at Waterloo because of your reputation. You'd go on the underground to King's Cross, there'd be someone else around who'd heard of you and knew that you'd be travelling through King's Cross. Then you get to the game, whatever, up north where you were going, and be fights there. Fights back in London at night, people knew you'd be coming back through London, be waiting for you.
Well, I think it's just reputation. They go on reputation, we go on reputation, and it's trying to see who's best.
They'll never stop the fact that rival supporters will fight. If you're brought up with a group of young geezers round your way, and as the geezers are growing up, they get into going to football, and you're in with that group, and you get into it.
2 o'clock, and the Everton fans begin to arrive. Police are waiting on the city boundaries to escort the coaches to the ground. Before they get out, there's a warning wrapped up in a welcome.
Welcome to Portsmouth. Just a few things before you leave the coach. One, it's very cold out there, and I seriously suggest to you remain on the coach until 2:15, when we will escort you round to the ground. The bit of the ground you're going in is very exposed and very cold, and you're much more comfortable here. You're not going to go anywhere near a pub. Your best bet is to stay here until about 2:15, and we'll take you in then.
Not taking any chances, the police escort the Everton fans into the ground in batches. But pockets of them have escaped the cordon and headed for the nearest pubs in Milton Road. They're now on the 657's territory. The pubs and even the local cemetery have been ambush points in the past. Weapons have been hidden here for use the following Saturday. There's tension as the 3 o'clock kickoff approaches. Everton fans move out of the pubs and the 657 are waiting. But the police are also here with dogs and trouble is avoided. The stray fans are shepherded towards the ground. Now all attention is at the gates. Stopping trouble during the game is the police objective here. Nearly every fan is frisked. At 3 o'clock, the kickoff. But the police problems are far from over outside Fratton Park. Hundreds of Everton fans have travelled down to Portsmouth without tickets. They now find they can't persuade the police to let them in. With the match so near and yet so far, they're furious.
Well, what can we do, you know? We stand around.
That's right, yeah.
Look at touts, try to get tickets off touts.
We're not troublemakers.
No, we're not troublemakers. No, we come down here, right, we supporters, the Everton Supporters Club, right? We come down here, there's no tickets. Why? The club's going to lose money.
I come from the Midlands. I'm Everton supporters from the Midlands.
What are you going to do if you don't get into the ground?
What am I going to do? I'm going to fuck off home, aren't I? What else can I do? Otherwise, the police will come later on with the dogs and whatever, and if you're hanging around, they'll put you in a van and whip you away.
In fact, they told us, right, down the street, like they said, no more, otherwise they're going to arrest us.
Yeah, clear off.
They said, go away or we're going to arrest you.
With the match in full swing, the mood outside is ugly. Many of the fans simply can't understand why the police don't bend the rules.
You know, there's 500 tickets that are unsold inside this ground, and the police have stopped them selling.
And what do they cause them the trouble? Causing the friction.
The ticket-only policy was meant to stop trouble, but the police are now in danger of seeing it backfire badly.
And they talk about football hooliganism. The police are the bleeding hooligans.
One small trouble spot, but a potential flashpoint, and the police move in.
I've just been over to the ticket office and there are 500 tickets for sale over there.
That is the
Because the police have closed it down. There's going to be empty spaces on the terraces over there. Any violences outside this ground, the police have manufactured. They have, because they've closed.
Travel 400 miles, man, what just listen, you don't sell tickets.
I go to away games all the time, and there's no problem getting into the ground. Is there not?
It's all tickets. It's a club rule, but it's a police order to stop the tickets.
There's no problem getting into any other ground apart from here.
The club make the rules, not the police. The police
stop
the
500 tickets in here. You stop the tickets.
There are no tickets on sale. Stop. End of story. Sorry about that.
It's a club rule.
Pause.
It's now 4:30, 15 minutes from time, and the police are quietly satisfied with the way things have gone.
We've had a few problems at the beginning of the match, in as much as there were quite a number of persons attended the game who hadn't got tickets and were trying to seek entrance.
And what happened to those people?
Those have been led away from the ground.
And what about on the ground itself? Have there been any evictions or arrests today?
Today we've got 4 ejections from the ground and 7 arrests for various public order offences.
And is that above average? Is that a bad total for you?
Oh, that's not bad. Not bad.
Okay.
Since August, the Hampshire police have mounted a massive security operation for every Portsmouth home game. Violence during matches and on the streets has been effectively contained. But the 657 hasn't faded away. They've increasingly switched their attention to away games. In previous seasons, they'd normally have gone by train. But for some time, the Portsmouth police have kept these trains under close surveillance, using what they call spotters, plainclothes officers. The same strategy has been applied with football coaches to good effect.
What we have done, and again it's not specifically aimed at a particular group called the 657 crew, what we did some years ago was send away football spotters to identify our known troublemakers and prevent problems arising at away games. And this is what we have still maintained.
And that policy has been successful?
That policy has been successful, very successful.
An article in Police magazine 2 years ago showed how police spotters outwitted the 657 gang on an away trip to Cardiff. The gang had hoped to escape police notice by pretending to be a wedding party in hired morning suits and top hats. But it didn't fool the spotters, who escorted them to the match, morning suits and all. The police success has forced the 657 to switch tactics. On October the 3rd, this coach was booked to take a group of youths from Portsmouth to a surprise 21st party in Blackpool. In fact, the surprise was on the coach driver, because the passengers were really the 657, and their destination wasn't Blackpool, but Liverpool, where Pompey were drawn to play that afternoon.
Their manner as they got on the coach was quite polite. They said good morning. They were, as you would see anywhere else, normally on a coach party, they had bags and they had newspapers. We could smell burning at the beginning. And I was still driving, so my mate walked back up here and come back down to the front of the coach, and he said they're lighting newspapers underneath the back seats. What they were actually doing was they were screwing up newspapers that they obviously finished reading, and they were setting light to them.
After 2 hours, the driver was persuaded to pull up at an Oxford service station. Unbeknown to him, this is a meeting point for football hooligan crews. The service station managers had taken steps to keep troublemakers out, but a private coach got round this. From Oxford, the coach headed north. The driver was ordered to make for Liverpool. Under protest, he agreed to drop them at Preston, a short train ride from the match. Liverpool won. There was crowd trouble and there were 14 arrests. Only a dozen of the 657 crew met the coach for the journey home.
We've been on the M6 roughly about 20 minutes to 25 minutes when there was holy hell let loose again at the back. There was seat cushions being thrown around all over the seats. The emergency door kept opening. They'd been wiping their nose, they'd been spitting. They'd had sandwiches where they was all jam down the insides of the curtains themselves. They'd actually urinated all over the floor. Actually, the coach. Actually, obviously, what they were doing was just sitting there and actually just urinating where they sat. And it was just like somebody had grabbed over 2 dustbins and emptied them all over the coach. It was unbelievable for a load of grown men to be travelling on a coach at that state, considering the fact they'd only been on it for about 3 hours at the most. One particular guy stood up and he actually was sick all over the seats. Well, I spent 12 and a half years in the army and I've done 3 tours in Northern Ireland, and I can tell you now that I've never been so scared in all my life.
Among the passengers on that return journey, Docker Hughes, the 657's failed parliamentary candidate.
He was on the coach. I would politely put it, bombed out of his mind 2/3 of the way up and 2/3 of the way back.
But despite all the chaos, the driver noticed that the 657 in fact were highly organised.
Myself, as I say, it was a pre-planned operation. During the journey they were referring to each other as the colonel, the general, as if they were talking to people, if you were in the army, people talking to people higher than what you were. I mean, they obviously knew what they were doing, and as I say, well organised, very well organised.
Hiring a private coach to outwit the police showed how hooligans hell-bent on trouble will always get their way. The incident has confirmed a growing view that the only real solution is to tackle the root causes of football violence and find out why hooligans behave the way they do. In some cases, there's apparently a political motivation. For example, when the Chelsea headhunters were arrested in Operation Own Goal last year, the police found strong evidence of National Front involvement. The graffiti around Fratton Park testifies to extreme right-wing sympathies here too. The National Front have long been active in Portsmouth. They've stood candidates in local and national elections. The NF regard Fratton Park as a recruiting ground. But although the hostility of some hooligans towards blacks and Asians worries the police, in Portsmouth's case there's been no organised link established between the 657 and the National Front. The Popperwell report also showed that football hooliganism is a universal problem, but psychologists point to a common factor.
The basic issue, I think, is one of status and reputation, and that is that everybody in society needs to have a sense of identity, needs to know their position in society. And most people traditionally have attained this through their occupation, through their job, through their possessions, through their membership of organisations like the Freemasons or Mountaineering Club or whatever. For large numbers of young people, at the moment, the only way to attain status and reputation is through being violent, through being tougher than the next person, through having stories told about the exploits that they've engaged in at some club or other. And it's grown up attached to football.
But if violence like this at Amsterdam last year really is a way of life, then suppressing it could simply send hooligans in search of other battlegrounds, a danger to which Superintendent Dawes admits.
The fact that we do tend to be more successful than we have been is likely to push problems elsewhere. It will and has manifested itself in as much as we are aware of, in the past couple of years or so, our own, in inverted commas, hooligan element turning up at places like the Isle of Wight, at nightclubs at Sandown and Shanklin, turning up at places like Brighton and Chichester and Wittering, to go to nightclubs, to go to amateur football clubs, just to cause the problems there that they've been prevented from causing here.
It's now 4:45. Portsmouth have lost 1-0, but it's a victory for the police. They've been more than a match for the hooligans. But there's a cost. 250 police to control 50 or so regular troublemakers will cost ratepayers £500,000 a season. Cheaper solutions, such as banning all away supporters, have met fierce resistance from the Football League. In any case, the police believe the violence will simply blow up somewhere else. The Popperwell report concludes there has always been violence in the world and there always will be violence. and however close social scientists get to determining the true cause of violence on the terraces, no complete cure can be prescribed even for the very long term. So ratepayers may have to live with the sort of police operation mounted in towns like Portsmouth at every home game. It's a once a fortnight fixture, but there'll never be a winner.